The police officer froze when he saw the photograph. It had been hidden inside an old box of evidence for more than 20 years. The picture was small and faded. At first glance, it looked normal. Just a quiet neighborhood street. A row of houses. A sidewalk. A street lamp glowing in the night. But in the corner of the photo, standing in the shadow near a parked car, was a man no one had ever noticed before. And the officer knew something terrifying. This photo had been taken the same night the first victim disappeared. If the man in the shadows had been there that night, then the most mysterious murder case in the city might finally have a face. But the deeper investigators looked into the photo, the more they realized something was very wrong. Because the man in the picture was someone the police already knew, and he had been helping them on the case. 22 years earlier, the town of Ridgewood looked peaceful. Tree-lined streets, small shops, friendly neighbors who waved at each other in the morning. It was the kind of place where people believed nothing bad could happen. Children rode bikes after school, families walked their dogs at night, and most doors were left unlocked. But in the fall of 2001, something changed. One Friday evening, a 28-year-old nurse named Emily Carter finished her shift at the hospital. She was tired but happy. She had just spoken with her sister on the phone and promised to visit the next day. Emily walked to her car in the hospital parking lot. Security cameras later showed her placing her bag in the passenger seat. Then she got into the driver's seat. Then the video ended. Emily Carter never arrived home. At first, no one panicked. Friends thought she might be busy. Her sister assumed she stayed late at work. But the next morning, Emily still hadn't called. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By Saturday afternoon, her family reported her missing. Police began a search. They found her car parked outside her apartment building. Her bag was still inside. Her phone was gone, and the car keys were still in the ignition. Detective Mark Dalton, a calm and experienced investigator, was assigned to the case. He had worked missing person cases before. Most ended with good news. Someone ran away. Someone traveled suddenly. Someone needed space. But something about Emily's case felt different. Her apartment was clean and normal. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom. There were no signs she planned to leave. Detective Dalton told his team something important that first night. "People don't vanish like this," he said quietly. "Someone knows what happened." The investigation began quickly. Police interviewed coworkers at the hospital, friends, neighbors, anyone who had seen Emily in the last 48 hours. Everyone said the same thing. Emily was kind, responsible, quiet. She had no enemies, no dangerous relationships, no reason to disappear. Days passed, then weeks. Search teams walked through nearby woods. Volunteers handed out flyers. Local news stations covered the story every night. But there was no sign of Emily Carter. And slowly, the town of Ridgewood began to feel afraid. Because something else happened. 6 months later, another woman disappeared. Her name was Laura Bennett, a 31-year-old teacher. Laura left a grocery store one evening just after sunset. Security cameras showed her pushing a cart to her car. She placed the groceries in the trunk. Then she walked to the driver's door. Then the video froze. Her car was found the next morning in the same parking lot. Groceries still in the trunk. Purse on the seat. Phone missing. Detective Dalton felt a cold chill when he saw the scene. It looked almost identical to Emily Carter's case. 2 women, both responsible adults. Both vanished near their cars. Both left their belongings behind. And both disappeared without a single witness. The police realized something terrible. This might not be one crime. This might be a pattern. The investigation grew larger. State investigators joined the case. FBI analysts reviewed the evidence. They studied maps, timelines, security footage, and they asked a frightening question. Was someone watching these women before they vanished? Detectives examined every person connected to both victims. Co-workers, friends, neighbors, even people who lived near the parking lots. But nothing connected the 2 women. No shared workplaces, no shared friends, no shared routines. It was like 2 separate mysteries. But Detective Dalton didn't believe that. Late one night in the police station, he spread the files across his desk. 2 photos, 2 maps, 2 timelines. and one feeling in his gut. Someone had planned this. Someone had watched. Someone had waited for the perfect moment. But who? The case grew colder. Months turned into years. Then another disappearance happened. This time it was Megan Shaw, 26-year-old college student. She vanished after leaving a late study session at the university library. Her car was found outside her apartment. Driver's door open, lights still on, and once again, her phone was missing. The town of Ridgewood was no longer peaceful. People locked their doors. Women stopped walking alone at night. Parents drove their children everywhere. Police increased patrols. But the person responsible seemed invisible. The media began calling the unknown criminal the Ridgewood Shadow, because no one ever saw him, and no evidence clearly pointed to anyone. Detective Dalton refused to give up. He re-examined every case file, every interview, every photograph, and one detail bothered him more than anything. In each disappearance, someone had reported seeing a man nearby, a quiet man, standing near cars, watching people leave parking lots, but the descriptions were always vague. Average height, dark jacket, baseball cap, nothing specific enough to identify anyone. Years passed. The files slowly moved into the cold case unit. New detectives joined the department. Old investigators retired. Detective Dalton stayed. He couldn't forget the faces of the victims. 3 women, 3 families still waiting for answers. One night, 22 years after Emily Carter vanished, Dalton sat alone in the evidence room. Cold cases surrounded him, dusty boxes filled with old reports. He opened Emily Carter's evidence box again. Inside were photographs from the hospital parking lot. Most had been reviewed hundreds of times. But Dalton looked again, slowly, carefully. One picture showed the street next to the parking lot. Another showed a row of parked cars. Then he noticed something strange. In the background of one photo, a man stood near a streetlight, almost hidden in the shadow. Dalton leaned closer. The man's face was partly visible. It was blurry, but something about it looked familiar. Dalton felt his heartbeat quicken. He scanned the image, zoomed in, enhanced the lighting, and suddenly, the face became clearer. Not perfect, but clear enough. Dalton stared at the screen because he recognized the man. The person in the photograph had not been a stranger. He had not been a random passerby. He had been inside the police station many times. He had spoken to investigators. He had even helped search for the missing women. And as Detective Dalton slowly said the name out loud, he realized something terrifying. The man in the shadows had been part of the investigation from the very beginning. And if Dalton was right, then the killer had been hiding in plain sight for more than 20 years. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting. Because when detectives pulled the man's full record, they found something that made the entire room go silent. The suspect had moved away years earlier, to another state, and just 2 weeks before Dalton found the photo, a woman had disappeared in that same town, in the exact same way. The room fell silent as the detective stared at the report. A woman had vanished in another state, nearly 1,500 miles away from Ridgewood. Her name was Rachel Turner, a 34-year-old office worker living in a quiet suburb. At first, it seemed like a standard missing person case. Rachel had left work on a Tuesday evening. Security cameras showed her walking to her car in the office parking lot. She unlocked the door, placed her purse on the passenger seat, and then the footage captured something strange. Rachel suddenly looked over her shoulder, as if she heard something behind her. A moment later, she was out of the camera's view. The next morning, her car was still there, parked in the same spot. Her purse was inside, but her phone was gone. Detective Mark Dalton stared at the report for a long time. It was the exact same pattern, the same method, the same chilling silence that followed. And now, the suspect from that old, shadowed photograph lived in the very town where Rachel Turner disappeared. Dalton slowly spoke the name again. Thomas Hale. For years, Hale had been known in Ridgewood as a quiet, helpful man. He had volunteered during the search efforts for the missing women. He attended community meetings, spoke politely with police officers, and was even described as supportive. But now, every memory of him looked different. Dalton pulled Hale's old records. Thomas Hale was 32 years old when Emily Carter, the first Ridgewood victim, disappeared. He worked as a maintenance technician for several buildings around town. That detail sent a shiver down Dalton's spine. It meant Hale had access to countless places: parking lots, apartment complexes, office buildings, places where people came and went, often alone, at night. But the most disturbing detail was this: Thomas Hale had been one of the volunteers who helped search the woods during the early days of Emily Carter's disappearance. He had stood right next to the officers, carried a flashlight, asked questions, and watched the investigation unfold from the inside. Dalton felt a heavy weight in his chest. If Hale was responsible, he had been walking beside the very people trying to catch him for years. The next morning, Dalton called a meeting with the cold case team. Detectives gathered around a large table, where photographs of the 3 Ridgewood victims were laid out: Emily Carter, Laura Bennett, Megan Shaw. Dalton then placed the grainy photograph of the shadowed man in the center. "This," he said quietly, "be the break we've been waiting for." The team studied the image. Even though it was old and blurry, the shape of the man's face was a startling match for Thomas Hale's driver's license photo from that same year. One detective finally asked the question on everyone's mind: "If this is him, why did we never notice before?" Dalton answered honestly: "Because we weren't looking at him as a suspect. Years ago, investigators had focused on people close to the victim's boyfriends, co-workers, family members. Hale didn't fit into any of those categories. He was just a helpful neighbor. And sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most ordinary." The next step was clear. They had to investigate Thomas Hale's life in the new state where he now lived. Dalton contacted the local police in the town of Silver Creek. It was a quiet place, surrounded by forests and hills. Another peaceful town, just like Ridgewood had once been. Detective Angela Ruiz from the Silver Creek Police Department joined the investigation. She listened carefully as Dalton explained the Ridgewood disappearances. 3 women, the same pattern, the same method. Then Dalton mentioned the photo and the name: Thomas Hale. Ruiz became very quiet. She had heard that name before. "Hale lives here," she said slowly. "He's been here for almost 15 years. Dalton asked the question that filled the room with tension. "What do you know about him?" Ruiz opened a file. "Not much," she admitted, which is strange in itself. Thomas Hale worked as a building repair technician in Silver Creek, the same kind of job he had in Ridgewood. He fixed lighting systems, parking gates, and security cameras, anything related to building maintenance, which meant he had unrestricted access to parking garages and office buildings, exactly the kind of place where Rachel Turner had just disappeared. Ruiz continued: "He lives alone. Quiet guy. Keeps to himself." Dalton felt the same chill he had felt years earlier. The same quiet man. The same kind of job. The same terrifying pattern. But they still needed proof. Old suspicions weren't enough to make an arrest. The investigators began building a new case from the ground up. They compared timelines. Thomas Hale had moved away from Ridgewood 12 years ago, right after Megan Shaw, the 3rd victim, disappeared. After he left, no more women vanished in Ridgewood. But when they checked the records in Silver Creek, they found something deeply disturbing. Rachel Turner was not the first woman who had disappeared there. 8 years earlier, another woman, Diane Matthews, had vanished after leaving a shopping center parking lot. Her case had never been solved. Police had assumed she simply left town, but the details were now glaringly familiar. Car found, person side, phone missing. Detectives in Silver Creek reopened the file immediately. 2 disappearances in their town. 1 prime suspect living nearby. The pressure was mounting, but Dalton wanted something solid, something scientific. Something that could not be argued away in court. He wanted DNA. The Ridgewood cases had one tiny piece of forensic evidence. A minuscule trace of unknown DNA had been found on the door handle of Laura Bennett's car. At the time, the technology was limited. The DNA profile was incomplete and had never been matched to anyone. It was stored in an evidence locker and forgotten. Now, modern forensic labs had far better tools. Dalton requested the sample be retested with the latest technology. While they waited for the results, investigators began quietly watching Thomas Hale. Unmarked cars were parked near his home. Detectives observed his daily routine. Hale seemed completely normal. He woke up early, drank coffee on his porch, drove to work, fixed equipment at several office buildings, and returned home each evening. There was no strange behavior, no suspicious actions. But during surveillance, Detective Ruiz noticed something unusual. Hale often drove slowly through parking lots late at night. He didn't stop or speak to anyone. He just drove through, watching, observing. It was the same behavior witnesses had described in Ridgewood decades earlier. The investigators now believed something chilling. Thomas Hale hadn't stopped his crimes. He had just changed locations. Then, the call came from the forensic lab. The DNA test results were ready. Detective Dalton stood in the lab office as the technician opened the report. The technician looked serious. The sample was small, she explained, but we were able to build a much stronger DNA profile using modern analysis. Dalton nodded, his heart pounding. Did it match anyone in the national database? The technician shook her head. No direct match. Dalton felt a wave of disappointment, but the technician wasn't finished. However, we found something else. She turned her computer screen toward him. This DNA shares a strong genetic connection with someone already in the database. Dalton leaned closer. Who? The technician pointed to a name on the screen. It wasn't Thomas Hale. It was someone closely related. A younger man with the same last name, from the same family line. The database listed him as Daniel Hale, Thomas Hale's nephew. Daniel Hale had been arrested 3 years earlier for an unrelated crime, and his DNA was on file. The implication was incredible. If the DNA from the old crime scene belonged to a close relative of Daniel Hale, then the suspect they had been watching for years was finally, scientifically connected to the case. But before anyone could celebrate, Detective Ruiz's phone rang. As she listened, her face turned pale. She hung up slowly. Dalton knew immediately that something was wrong. What happened? Ruiz spoke in a quiet, strained voice. Another woman is missing. Dalton's stomach dropped. Where? Ruiz looked directly at him, her eyes filled with dread. Silver Creek. She paused, and her voice trembled slightly as she delivered the final, horrifying detail. And the last place she was seen was in the parking garage where Thomas Hale works. The parking garage was silent. Detective Angela Ruiz stood at the yellow police tape stretched across the entrance. Red and blue lights from patrol cars flashed against the concrete walls. Another woman had vanished. Her name was Lena Brooks, a 29-year-old nurse who worked the night shift at a nearby hospital. After work, she walked to the parking garage where her car was parked. Security cameras captured her entering the garage, but they never showed her leaving. Detective Mark Dalton arrived shortly after sunrise. He stepped under the concrete ceiling and looked around slowly. The garage smelled like oil and cold metal. Every sound echoed. Cars were parked in neat rows, but Lena Brooks' car sat alone near the back corner. The driver's door was closed. Inside the car, her purse rested on the passenger seat. Dalton felt a cold chill. It was the same pattern again. Purse left behind, phone missing, and a quiet parking lot where no one noticed anything. Angela Ruiz joined him beside the vehicle. Security cameras? Dalton asked. Ruiz nodded. We're reviewing them now. Inside the garage office, detectives watched the footage frame by frame. The black and white video showed Lena Brooks walking across the garage floor toward her car. She looked tired after a long shift. She unlocked the door. Then something strange happened. Lena stopped. She looked behind her, just like Rachel Turner had done years earlier. For a second, the camera caught movement near the far wall. A shadow, a figure stepping out from behind a support column. Then the video flickered. The camera lost focus for 3 seconds. When the image returned, Lena Brooks was gone. The garage looked empty again. Dalton leaned forward in his chair. Pause it. The technician froze the frame. There, barely visible in the darkness, was the outline of a man. Tall, thin, standing just outside the camera's clear view. Ruiz whispered, "That could be him." Dalton didn't answer. He was already thinking about the DNA report. Thomas Hale's nephew had been linked through genetic markers. Now another woman had disappeared from a location Hale worked in. The evidence was building, but they still needed something stronger, something direct. Something that could prove beyond doubt that Thomas Hale was responsible. Later that afternoon, police obtained a search warrant. 3 patrol cars drove quietly down the narrow road toward Hale's house. It was a small white home at the edge of Silver Creek. Trees surrounded the property. The place looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Detective Ruiz knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Dalton checked the warrant. "We go in." Officers pushed the door open. The house was quiet. Inside, everything looked neat. The living room had simple furniture, a couch, a small television, a shelf filled with books. Nothing unusual, nothing that looked suspicious. But detectives knew something important about people who hide secrets. The truth is rarely in the open. It is usually hidden. They began searching every room carefully. Kitchen cabinets, closets, drawers, boxes. Then one officer noticed something strange in the hallway. A small door on the floor. It looked like a storage hatch. Dalton walked over slowly. "Open it." The officer lifted the hatch. Below it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Ruiz turned on her flashlight. Concrete steps disappeared into a small basement. Dalton felt his heart beating harder. "Let's go." They moved down the stairs slowly. The basement smelled cold and damp. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. Under the light sat a workbench. Tools were arranged carefully, almost perfectly. But something on the far wall caught Ruiz's attention. Several metal hooks were mounted there, and beside them, rows of plastic containers, each one sealed tightly. Dalton opened the first container. Inside were small personal items, a necklace, a wristwatch, a keychain. Ruiz opened another container. Inside was a phone, an old model. The screen cracked but still recognizable. The investigators exchanged a look. These were not random objects. These were belongings. Items someone had once carried every day. Items that disappeared along with the missing women. Then Dalton opened the third container. Inside was something even more chilling. A driver's license. He held it under the light. The name printed across the card read, Rachel Turner. Ruiz slowly stepped backward. "That's her." Dalton continued searching the containers. Another license. Diane Matthews. Another small bag. Inside it was a silver bracelet, engraved with the name Emily Carter. The room became completely silent. For nearly 20 years, investigators had searched for answers. And now, the truth was sitting in front of them, stored like trophies, hidden beneath an ordinary house. Ruiz whispered, "He kept everything." Dalton looked around the basement carefully. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Then his eyes stopped on something else. At the far end of the room was a heavy steel door, locked from the outside. A bolt secured it tightly. Dalton walked toward it slowly. Ruiz followed behind him. "Do you think?" she asked quietly. Dalton didn't answer. He slid the bolt open. Then he slowly turned the handle. The door creaked as it opened. Inside was a small concrete room, empty, except for a chair and ropes attached to the wall. Ruiz stepped back immediately. "Call the forensic team." Within hours, the house was surrounded by investigators. Evidence technicians photographed every object, every container, every tool, every inch of the basement. But one question remained. Where was Thomas Hale? Patrol units searched the town. His truck was not at home. His phone was turned off. For the first time since the investigation began, the suspect had disappeared. Night fell over Silver Creek. Detectives gathered at the police station, reviewing everything they had found. The containers, the personal items, the hidden room. It was enough evidence to arrest Thomas Hale. But they still had to find him. Then another officer rushed into the room. "Detective Ruiz." Everyone turned. "What is it?" Ruiz asked. The officer held up a printed report. "Highway Patrol just found a truck abandoned on Route 17. Dalton stood up immediately. "Whose truck?" The officer swallowed. "Registered to Thomas Hale." Ruiz grabbed her jacket. "Where is he now?" The officer shook his head slowly. "That's the problem." Dalton felt a heavy silence fill the room. "What do you mean?" The officer answered quietly. "The truck was empty. Ruiz stared at the map of the area. Route 17 ran straight into miles of forest, mountains, and endless wilderness. The perfect place to disappear. Dalton looked at the evidence photos one last time. The containers, the names, the missing women. For decades, Thomas Hale had hidden in plain sight. Now he was gone, somewhere in the darkness beyond the town, and the hunt had just begun. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Stay safe out there.